As I've mentioned in a number of my other videos, the Canon 40mm f2.8 attached to a Canon full-frame DSLR body is honestly probably my favorite lens camera combos of the entire digital era. You have the uniquely magical 40mm focal length on full frame combined with the outstanding supreme image quality of the 40mm f2.8 pancake lens, and what you get is an absolutely unbeatable experience, especially when you consider that the 40mm is incredibly affordable and super conveniently sized. But here's the thing. Theoretically, couldn't you get basically the same experience by attaching Canon's 24mm pancake lens to an APS-C camera? I mean, think about it. Obviously, externally, they look virtually identical, but more importantly than that, when you account for the crop factor, the effective focal length of the 24mm on APS-C basically becomes almost exactly the same as 40 on full frame. So with all that in mind, could you save money and get the 40mm full frame experience by just putting the 24 on an APS-C DSLR? Now, let's start off with price. Exactly how much would you be saving by going for a 24 APS-C combo rather than the 40mm full frame combo? Now, obviously that's going to depend on whether or not you buy new or used, which DSLR bodies you pick, which stores or websites you would buy these products from. So today, in order to get a rough estimate of proportionally how much more expensive the 40mm deal would be compared to the 24mm deal, I've created an experiment. So what we're going to do is go on Canon USA's website for a price reference point, and what we're going to do is take the price of their cheapest APS-C DSLR and combine it with the price of the 24mm and compare that to the price of the cheapest full-frame DSLR along with the 40mm. Now, currently the cheapest new APS-C DSLR you can get from Canon is going to be the 7D. Yes, the package does come with an 18-55 kit lens, but still it is actually the cheapest APS-C camera you can buy from them new with or without a lens, and that's going to go for $400, and Canon currently lists the price of the 24mm prime at $130 for a total of $530. Now, on full frame though, the story's pretty different. The cheapest new full-frame camera you can get from Canon is going to be the 6D Mark II, which costs $1,400. And even then, the 40mm pancake lens is actually slightly more expensive at $180 for a total of $1,580 for the full-frame combo. That means that in this hypothetical experiment, the APS-C package only cost 33.5% of the price of the full frame. Now, obviously, like I said, this was just a theoretical example. Obviously, it could differ, but this way at least you can get an idea proportionally of how much more you may be spending if you were to go full frame and why it would be attractive for someone to take the APS-C route instead. So before we move on with what makes these two combos different, I think we should first address what about them is exactly the same. Now, first and most obviously is build quality. I mean, these lenses are nearly identical. I mean, if you put them in my hand, one in each hand, and you were to have me guess which one is which just from feeling them, I'd have no idea. I mean, even looking at them, if you covered up the logos, you'd have basically no way to tell. Build quality is basically the same, which is actually a good thing because build quality is really good on both of these lenses. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not going to be the best built lens. It's not even the best built sub $200 lens, but it is definitely the best built sub $200 lens you can get brand new. I mean, the fact that you can get a metal lens mount and really nice style build quality for well under $200 is really impressive for both and is something that's worth pointing out. Now, the other main thing that's exactly the same for these is going to be the focusing, the STM autofocus motor. And I honestly have mixed thoughts on STM. Now, I know a lot of people absolutely love it because of the video autofocus capabilities, but aside from that, which I personally don't really care about since I only manually focus in video, I don't love STM. Don't get me wrong, accuracy is fine, functionality it's fine, but I've never found it to be either as fast or as silent as USM, which is supposedly the inferior version of the autofocus motor. So autofocus again is fine, not too fast, not too silent, definitely does the job well, but don't expect the best autofocus ever. And with that too, with manual focus, it's okay, But I have my criticisms. So for this, the manual focus is actually digital. So by turning the manual focus ring, you're not actually mechanically moving something around within the lens itself. You're sending a digital command to the lens to focus. So there is kind of a feeling of disconnect when you are manually focusing. Again, functionality-wise, it's fine. You get used to it really quick, but it does definitely not feel quite as good as a more traditional manual focus setup. So that's what's going to be exactly the same about these two lenses. But where did the differences start? Now to start off, let's look at the actual fields of view you'll get by using these lenses, because yeah, technically, number-wise, the equivalent focal lengths are going to be about the same, but that's not the whole story. Even if the equivalent fields of view are going to be very similar, APS-C and full frame are still very different. You're still going to get differences in terms of distortion, depth of field, that sort of thing. So rather than trying to explain it, I'm going to show first full frame on the 40mm and then APS-C on the 24. So here we have the 40mm, and here is the 24. Again, here's a second example with the 40mm, and now the 24. So how do these differences play out in actual practice? Well, here's the thing. Now, don't get me wrong, I like the fields of view on both, and I actually really enjoy using the 24 on APS-C. In fact, it's actually the lens I recommend most to people who are looking for a general purpose lens for their APS-C camera. I'd much highly recommend that, much more than an 18-55. But the thing is, I still prefer the 40mm on full frame. It's kind of weird, even though technically it's not going to be the wider angle field of view, I actually find the sense of breadth, the sense of wideness is going to be much more pronounced and much greater on the 40mm. Additionally, though, you're also getting a shallower depth of field and greater emphasis on your subject on the 40mm. Again, it's relatively subtle details, but if you've used both lenses extensively, you notice it a lot, and it's a major advantage of the 40mm. And it's part of the reason that even though, again, technically you're getting very similar fields of view, the 40 just has a look to it that the 24 on APS-C cannot recreate. Now, how about most importantly of all, image quality? How does image quality differ on these two setups? Well, here's the thing. Image quality is really, really strange on the 24mm. It's honestly kind of baffling, because here's the thing. Starting all the way open at f2.8, it's good. Stop down, it's good. Stop down again, it's good. Stop down even more, it's good. You get the point. It's one of the only lenses I've ever used that manages to have good image quality throughout basically the entire aperture range, but never becomes truly razor sharp. It's so strange because lots of lenses I've used, yeah, they'll be soft in the wider apertures, but once you stop down, it gets really, really sharp. But here, there's neither of that. At no point is the image quality bad. At no point is the image quality great. It's always good, which is fine. It's definitely going to be more than good enough for the majority of the time, but the fact that it can never get truly razor sharp is actually really baffling, because if you think about it, this lens has everything going for it. It's a relatively modern design, designed specifically to be used on APS-C, so you'd think it would take advantage of that and have really sharp image quality at least around f8 or f11 or whatever. But the strange thing is, older lenses that were designed for not only full frame, but film cameras from the 90s, like old 50mm, even if you stop down a little bit, those are going to have way better image quality than the 24mm Pancake, especially once you've stopped down to kind of that really, really sharp sweet spot, you know, f8, f11, whatever. Even though the 24mm is probably going to be a little sharper all the way open, it's just kind of weird that it never gets razor sharp. Now, the 40mm, on the other hand, that's a different story. Sharpness on that is absolutely fantastic. All the way open at f2.8, you already have more detail, more resolution, more sharpness than the 24 at any aperture, and stop down even a little bit and the image quality becomes basically perfect. It's really, really fantastic on full frame. But here's the interesting thing. The 40mm on APS-C is even better than the 24 on APS-C. So not only is it better on full frame, which I don't think is going to surprise anybody, but the fact that this lens designed for full frame is even better than the 24 on APS-C, which is like the home turf of the 24, that's kind of surprising too. Because again, it's a similar deal. Not quite as sharp as it is on full frame, but when you put the 40mm on APS-C, it can still get razor sharp image quality very easily, which again is really strange why the 24 is just kind of lacking in that department. So those are going to be your two big differences there, although I should point out there is one other difference that's not going to be the biggest, but it would be unfair of me not to mention, and that's macro. And here's an example where the 24 has the upper hand. Now the 40mm macro, it could focus as close as 0.3 meters, about 1 foot, which is fine. That's like the average for standard primes, no complaints there. But the 24 can get like absurdly close. It can get as close as 0.16 meters. That's incredibly close. I mean, you can get some really cool, unique shots that you really could not with any other Canon prime lens. So that's a really nice feature. Again, for some people, they may not be using it all the time, but it's a nice advantage that's worth pointing out. So with all this in mind, is the 24 on APS-C a viable alternative to a 40mm on full frame? No, not by any stretch of the imagination. There's something unique and special about the 40 full frame combo that has not really been replicated by any camera setup I personally ever used, certainly not a 24 on APS-C. Now, like I said, the 24 on APS-C is still a good camera lens setup that I recommend to people all the time, but it's not going to replace the 40mm on full frame. If you want that unique experience that so many people have raved about ever since the 40mm came out, you need a full frame DSLR and you need the 40mm. Now, I understand that price I mentioned of nearly $1,600 can be a bit daunting, but here's the thing, you can get it used. I mean, if you think about it, a 5D Mark II, 6D, they're both hovering around $600 now, $500, and think you could find a 40mm used for closer to about $150. That's well under $1,000 for an absolutely killer camera lens setup. Now, with that said, too, if you were to buy used, you could save even more on the APS-C end. You know, you can get like a T3i for like $175 and get the 24 for like $100. So yeah, proportionally, the full frame is still going to be a lot more expensive, but especially when you take everything into account, the fact that you could save a lot used, how much better it is the combo to have, no doubt about it.